Learn how to create a sticky notes app using Appwrite from Dennis Ivey. Appwrite is an open source, self-hosted backend as a service platform that makes building backends quick and easy. Appwrite provided a grant to make this course possible.
Hey, what's up everybody? I'm Dennis Ivey, developer advocate at Appwrite, and in this video, I want to show you how to make one of the coolest notes applications that you've ever seen. So before we get started, I want to walk you through a demo of the final product. I'll show you some of the features that we're about to build into this. And then I want to show you some helpful resources that are really going to make following this video a lot easier. So I've prepped written guides. We have the final source code. I just want to show you how all this works, and then we'll just go ahead and jump right into it. So let's get started. Okay, so this is going to be the final product at the end of the video, and I want to show you every single feature here. So first of all, we have a sticky notes application, and I can move these notes anywhere I want. And the cool thing is this is all saved in a real database. If I refresh it, I don't have to explicitly save these notes. It's automatically saved for me. Now, at any point, I can move these notes, go ahead and change the colors to whatever I want. We just use that color palette. If I want to add a new note, I can go ahead and generate one, set that color, and I get the note. Now, something that's pretty cool, and I was really excited to add this feature here, is an auto-save feature. So as I add a note, let's just say hello world. You notice how we have this load spinner. Now, when that spinner stops, it's going to wait 2 seconds. It's going to automatically save that note for me. Now, this saves every 2 seconds, but if I keep typing, it doesn't start saving until the last key up event. So that way, we're able to keep typing. We can work on it. We don't have to worry about explicitly saving anything. It just does it all for us. Now, when it comes to note sizing, this is all also automatic for us. As we type, we're constantly reading the input fields here, and we're just growing that note and shrinking it as the user adds or removes data, something that's also really cool. Now, if we want to delete a note, we can always just hit that delete button, and this is all being updated. Now, when it comes to the tech stack, we are going to be using React on the front end, and for our backend, we are using Appwrite, which is an open source alternative to Firebase, and this is where we have our database. So if we go in here, we can actually see our data. We connect to all of this with the Appwrite Web SDK. That's how we make requests to it. So if you don't have an account on Appwrite, go to appwrite.io. Make sure you have an account. There's a very generous free tier. So this is what we're going to be using throughout our project. So there's two more things to talk about before we get started. So first, we have the source code. Make sure you download this. This is linked up in the video description. This is the final code for this project. It's great to reference it anytime you get stuck. Go ahead and use this and see what that final code is supposed to look like. Now, with that, I also have a little bit of surprise here. So I have a written guide that I myself am going to follow throughout this tutorial. And this is literally every single step in this project here. So if we go through these 8 steps here, we are going to go ahead and follow all of this. So if I want to go ahead and see what we're doing in section 2.2, I can go ahead and click on it. I have the written description of what I'm going to talk about, all the source code. So if I ever want to copy anything at any point, I can just go ahead and hit copy to clipboard, and that code is mine. So this is going to be very helpful. You can always jump to any point here and use it as a reference. This is also going to be linked up in the video description. Make sure to use it because I'm following every single step in this process using this guide. All right, so now it's time to get things started, and we're going to kick things off by using the written guide for this tutorial. And I want to show you how to use this and how to follow along to really make this process a lot easier, so you know where to reference all the source code, all the code examples, and written instructions. So let's start by opening this up and make sure you're in part 1, and I'm going to follow this along directly with you, at least to kick things off. So in this first part here, you can see all the commands you need to run. You see the written explanations here, all the prompts you need to select here. And in the second step, the files we need to delete, the files we need to clean up, the components that we need to create. So for example, we're going to create a notes page. If you want to actually just copy this code directly, you can just go ahead and add that to clipboard and copy and paste that in. I'll recommend you actually type this out, but if you ever need it, it's right here. So then we go into our app.jsx file here, or our component. I show you how to import that, where to add that. So all the examples are directly in here. So let's actually follow this. So I'm going to open up my terminal here, and I'm going to use VS Code for my text editor. So I'm going to use a terminal directly in here. And we're going to follow the first step here by creating our React application with Vite. And you need to make sure you have Node.js installed before you do that. So make sure you have it. And let's just go ahead and run npm create Vite. And this is going to go ahead and ask me a series of questions like my project name. I'm going to call this my app, and then I'm going to make sure we select React. And I'm going to use JavaScript. If you want to use TypeScript, go ahead and do that. For this tutorial, this is the one we're going to select. So this is going to create my boilerplate code. That's all on my desktop. I'm going to find that file, open this up, and then we're going to run some basic installs here. So we'll close this out. We'll open up my terminal, run npm install. Now, while that's downloading the default packages here, let's go ahead and check the next steps here. So I need to delete my app.css file and then remove everything from index.css and then clean up my app.jsx file. So we'll just do that once that's done. So let's run our server just to make sure it looks good. And I want to open this up here on port 5173. And this is my app right here. So let's go ahead and change this. So inside of my source folder, we're going to delete app.css. We'll move that to trash. Then index.css, I'm going to go ahead and copy all of that, delete it. So we want a completely clean slate because we're going to add our own code here. And from here, we can go into app.jsx. And let's just go ahead and remove all of this besides the empty fragments here. And I'm just going to write my app just so we can see some kind of output here. So we'll remove this state. We'll fix that indentation right there, clean up some space. And we should have just a very empty component. And at this point, I can just go ahead and see what I have here. So inside of my application, it should just look like this. No styling, just some text that says my app. So inside of my source folder, what I want to do is create a page for my notes page. And even though this application is only going to have one page, I still want to separate my code into different pages and components just to keep that code clean and separate. So inside of source, let's go ahead and create a folder called pages and then a page called notes page.jsx. And what I'm going to do here is use a shortcut. So React arrow function component export. So if I type in RFACE, I can hit enter and it's going to generate this component for me. And this is an extension that you can use in VS Code. So go ahead and add in ES7 React Redux code snippets. I have one of these installed. And essentially there's certain shortcuts that you can type. Makes it a lot easier just to generate these components without having to type them all out from scratch here. So now that I have this component, let's go into app.jsx. Let's import this. So we'll just bring this in right here. So import notes page, and we're going to bring this in right here. And I want this to be a div actually. And then the actual notes page component, I can bring in right here. So with that, we should see notes page right there. And let's go to the guide again. So we have our component. We cleaned up what we were supposed to. If we go to step 1.2 in basic styling, here is where we want to just go ahead and add in some CSS. So I want to take care of some basic styling before we move on to specific app-like styling. So we want to set the background. We want to set the default fonts, text size, and so on. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and just copy this right here. And let's bring that in. So this is all going to be within index.css. And in here, we're just adding that basic styling. And then in our app, we have that dark background color. And then we create some grid lines right here with that background image, set the default height, make sure we have a background size, and our position is going to be relative because we want to make sure those notes that we drag around have an absolute position. So we need to make sure the parent has a relative position. Now, if I go to my app, this is what it looks like right here. So far, so good. Okay, so going into step 1.3, what I'm going to do here before we actually set up a backend is I want to make sure we have some data that we can work with before we get to the more complex stuff. So this is going to get a lot easier to actually reference before we actually start working with a real database. So here's what we're going to have here. We're going to have an array of different notes here. They're going to be an object here, and each note is going to have an ID, some kind of body text right there, some colors, and a position. Now with these values, if we actually look at these, and I'm actually just going to copy this and then we're going to see what it actually looks like. We're going to put this into assets and then call this file fakedata.js. And I'll actually go by piece and explain it. So let's create a new file called fake data and make sure it's a .js file and not a .json file. And the reason for that is we're going to have some rich text here. So for example, our body, we're going to have some data here where we may want to have some kind of line breaks. If we want to add more maybe styling to that font, we want to make sure that it's all stringified, and we're not going to be able to stringify that if that's just JSON data. And the same for colors. So inside of our colors, we have this object right here. And in our actual database, that's going to be stored as a string. So we need to stringify it. And then when we render it out, we're going to parse this data. So again, that's why it needs to be JavaScript data. Now, the last part here is the position. These are just going to be X and Y coordinates for this specific card. So I have some filler data that I already added in here. So that's that rich text. We have some colors. So this one will be purple. This one's going to be blue. And then the actual yellow color. And we're going to reference these values to style the actual note here. So back to our guide, we set up our JSON data. So I explain how everything's going to look right here. Then for our card component, we need to create a separate component. So we're going to create this component, and then we're going to reference the actual body and then render that out. So let's go ahead and create this note card component. So back to our code, we're going to create a folder called components. So we're going to also separate this components, and this is going to be notecard.jsx. And let's use that shortcut. So React arrow function component exported. And when we render out an actual note, we're going to pass down the note itself. Now for the body, because we want to parse this right away. So we're going to create this variable called body, and we're going to call JSON parse. And then we'll pass in note.body like that. Now for the actual data, let's go ahead and just render out the body like that. And that should be it for the note card. Now, let's clear up a little bit of this. Let's go into our notes page. And inside of our notes page, in here, I want to import my note data. So we're going to import fake data, and that's going to be from assets. And we have that in fake data.js like that. And what I want to do here is create an alias because I want to reference these by note. So import fake data as notes here. And in fake data.js, that's going to be this array of objects right here. So we have note 1, note 2, and 3, and all those have a different position. And then let's go ahead and just map through these. We want to render these out. So we'll go ahead and call notes.map, and we want to go through each note. And as we render these out, what I'm going to do here is import the note component. So we'll import note card, and then we want to render that out and close that off here. And first of all, we need a key. So we're going to use the note ID for the key. We want to make sure that that's unique. And then we want to pass in the actual note object, and that's going to be just the note itself. So let's save that, and let's go into our steps here. So we rendered that out. That looks correct here. And before we add some styling, let's just see what we have. So we see each note. It's a little bit difficult to see because they're all blended in together and they all have the same text, but we can see note 1, 2, and 3. So next, I want to make sure these notes are actually styled here. So if we go down in our instructions here, we can see the CSS that we can actually use for this note. So we'll go ahead and copy that to clipboard. And then what we're going to do is go ahead and add in the card class to an actual note. And we're going to use the actual note background and body color to go ahead and style that in line. So we're going to have a default style for every note. And then the actual note itself will have its own colors for that and the positioning style. So we'll go into our index.css file, and let's go ahead and just bring that in right here. We'll paste that in. So we have a width for every note. We set a radius, set the cursor pointer for that specific note, and then we just add in some kind of box shadow just to make sure it looks a little bit more 3D. And to actually implement this, we need to make sure that this class is added to the note body. So we're going to add in card right here. So that wraps the entire note. And because of that inline styling, I need to make sure to go ahead and parse the position of the actual note. So that's going to be the X and Y values here later on that we're going to use. So JSON.parse, we need to parse that data, and that's going to be note.position. And then we're going to do the same for body. So const body, or not body, but colors. And that's going to be JSON.parse, and we'll call note.colors right here. So we want to set the unique colors for every note. And for the colors, we're going to reference this now, and that's going to be styled inline. So we're going to use a note body color, and we're going to set background color, and that's going to be referencing colors.color body like that. And that should style the note. And when I save it, you're going to notice that indenting fixed. So I have Prettier installed in VS Code here. So that's how it just auto formats that for me. So let's see if this is working. So if we go to each note, here we go. So it looks a little bit off because the text is all white. We're going to style that in a second, but we at least can see the note width and then the actual text changing based on each note while taking on all the stylings for the note class. So moving on to the next step now, we're going into part 1, 1.5. So finalizing note card style. So what we need to do here is we want our note to be like a text field where we can actually make edits directly within the note card, but we don't want it to look like a standard text field. We want it to look like a note that you can actually write on. So what I'm going to do is create a body around the note itself. We're going to create a text area here, and we're going to style that text area so you can't actually see that. And that's also going to have its own colors here. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to create a body and then a text area. So we're going to wrap this here. And this is going to be the class of note-body. And then the body itself, I'm going to copy this and we're going to import this above or paste this above. And this will be text area. And we'll bring this as the default value actually of the text area. So I'm going to bring this in, and that's going to be an attribute here. So default value, and that's where the body is going to go. So I need to make sure it's only one curly bracket around that. And if we look at the note itself, it looks a little bit bad right now. So we want to make sure to style that. And we want to go ahead and add in this style right here. So for the actual text area, we're going to style the text. So color text here. So for this, we're going to do style, and the color of the actual text will be colors-color text. And that should give it its unique styling, which I think most of these colors will be black. So that looks good right there. And we need to actually style the text area now. So let's go into our guide here, and we're going to copy the card body text area, and then the actual focus of that text area. So let's copy that and then review everything line by line. So inside of index.css, we're pasting that. So card body, we add some padding, we set a border radius on that body, and then the text area itself, we want to make sure to inherit the background color from the card itself. Then we want to make sure that we have no border because you don't want it to look like a text area. The height and width, we want to make sure that covers everything. Resize is going to be none. We set the font right there, and then the focus styles. So let's take a look. Let's see, card-body. Looks like I added that. Let's go ahead and just check the note card itself. Card body, that's what it was supposed to be. And there we go. So we're going to fix this right here, but that's looking a lot better. It actually looks like a note. So let's continue here in finalizing the card style. So we want to add in a header now. So we're going to create a div with the class name of card header. And then the actual style, the color to that is going to be colors.color header. So the header is going to be like a variation of that built-in color. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll create that just above our card body. So we'll create the div, and this is going to have the class of card-header. And then the inline style is going to be background color, and that's going to be colors.color header, like that. Okay, and then we don't have any text in there, and let's just take a look. Let's see. So before we actually see that output, we want to make sure to copy the card header CSS. So in the next step, we're also going to copy that. We'll bring this into index.css, and I'm going to put this above the card body. So we have the card, and I want to bring this in so the hierarchy is a little bit more accurate. We'll save that. So we have a default background color. I just realized I don't think I need that, so I'll update the actual guide here to make sure we don't have that. We display that as flex because we're going to have multiple items in there. We're going to have a trash icon, and then later on when you're saving a note, it's going to have that load spinner. So we want to make sure that that's in line. We set that styling with the padding, and let's take a look. So I should see the difference here. I'm not sure why I don't see it. So card header, and then in the actual note card, it's card header like that. Color header, that's why it's not working. So color header. And there we go. So we don't have anything in there just yet, but that styling already gives us a header and then the actual body. So moving down to the next step, let's go into absolute positioning. So we want to actually, let's finish up the card header. Let's go ahead and make this trash icon. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy this entire component. I'll recommend you do the same. And we're going to go ahead and just render out this SVG file here. So let's copy all of that, and that's going to be inside of a folder called icons, and the instructions I set to do that inside of icons. So let's create a new folder for that. So that's going to be icons, and that'll be trash.jsx. We'll create that. We'll paste all of that in, and we just want to export default and want to make sure we actually export the trash icon. And here, again, it's just an SVG that we wrap around that. We can adjust the size if we want by passing that down as a parameter here, but all the colors and all of that is all already prepped here. So inside of our note card, we'll go ahead and import trash, and inside of the card header, let's create some space, and that'll be trash like that. And let's take a look. So here we go. We see the trash icon. And then I believe from here, we can go to the next steps here. And that's where I show you how to import that. So absolute positioning. So right now, every single card has an X and Y value. We're going to go ahead and add in position absolute to the card class. We'll do that inside of index.css. And I'm just going to paste that under my cursor here. So we're going to call that position absolute. And what this is going to do is it's going to stack all the cards on top of each other because they have an absolute position, but we haven't specified what that is. So they're all just going to the top and left right here. So we only see the last card that's actually on top, but they're all right there. So to actually place them, what we need to do is go into our note card here, and we're going to add that directly in the styling because we have these positions right here. So remember, inside of our fake data.js file, we have a X and Y position right here. So we're going to grab that and then set that here. So in styling, let's make sure that that's indented. Let's add a comma right there. And then we're going to set left right now. And the value of this, we're going to need backticks for this because we need to set the actual position. So we're going to do position.x for left. And then we're going to set the pixel value. So once that's set, we're going to do the same for top here. So let's just copy this, paste it, and that's going to be the top position, and that's going to be position Y. So now we should see the cards placed everywhere. So that's perfect. Now, the next thing I want to fix is this scroll right here. So what I want to do is make sure that this scroll bar is never seen because by default, the max scroll is set to the height of the actual content. So let's go ahead and create a function that automatically updates the size of this when a card gets rendered. And then as we type, it also adjusts to that. So in order to actually update this text area, we need to create a reference so we can make updates to it. So we're going to call or import useRef here. And useRef allows us to reference DOM elements and actually update them without re-rendering the entire component. So we're able to reference the elements, and that's how we can actually set the value for text area. And we also need to import useEffect, and this is called on every single life cycle update. So when we first render our component, we want to call useEffect, and we want to call this auto grow function that we're about to create to make sure that that card is actually updated. So let's go ahead and import that. We have useRef and useEffect, and we need to go ahead and create that text area ref. So text area ref will be the name of it. And useRef, the way we call that is we just call useRef directly, and the default value will be null. And then we assign what this ref is actually going to be by passing this into that text area. So we can pass in ref right here. And now at any point, we can reference this text area by calling something like text area dot current, because that's going to give us the current value. It's a little bit weird, but we have to call current in order to actually reference that. So let's go ahead and create the function now. So we're going to create a function called auto grow, and with auto grow, we're going to take the actual reference here. So we're going to create the function itself, and I completely forgot to pass in that right there. So text area ref, because we need to pass this in directly into the function. And from here, let's look at our code here. So in this section, we first want to destructure text area ref. So I want to make sure it's easier to actually get the value. So we're going to call const and get the current value. And this will be text area ref like that. And from here, we just want to set the height to auto and then adjust the actual height in pixels. So let's paste that in. And as we call the function, we're getting the current value of the text area. So current is just that text area itself. And we're first saying the style of the height is going to be auto. So auto adjust that and then set that in pixel value. And we're taking the current scroll height to adjust that. So that's all this function does. Now to actually call this, because right now we have the function, but we're not doing anything with it, we want to call this on first load. So we're going to use useEffect here. And we're going to pass in an empty dependency array because we only want this to be called on the first iteration of this or the first render. And we're going to call auto grow. And let's pass in the text area ref. So at this point, the cards should grow like that. But the only issue is as I add stuff to it, now we see the scroll bar because we have a fixed height to that. We have a set height, but we're not adjusting it. So once we exceed a certain value, the cards start growing. So in order to fix that, what I'm going to do is go ahead and go into the text area, and I'm going to call this on input. So we're going to reference the on input event listener. So as we're typing, we're going to go ahead and call the auto grow function. And we need to put that in a function because we need to pass in a value to this. So auto grow, here we pass in the text area ref like that. And as we make those changes, we're just going to go ahead and grow it. So right now, as I grow that and as I decrease that, it shrinks and grows with me. And that's perfect. So in the next step, what we're going to do is go ahead and move on to making our cards draggable. So what we're going to do is go ahead and update the position value. So right now it's hard coded. We have our position set like this. We can't update it. So what we'll need to do here is change our position to use the useState hook instead of hard coding this value, because with the useState hook, we have this set position method that we can call. Now, what will happen here is every time we drag the card around on the screen, we're going to go ahead and call the set position method, and this will update the X and Y position of our note card. Now, anytime we call set position, this re-renders that component, therefore re-rendering the component out on the new part of the screen. So the top and left position will change as we drag it around because it just keeps getting re-rendered, therefore creating that draggable effect here. So we're going to go ahead and update that. Let's do that right now. So we'll change this to use state. We want to import that. So use state here. And we'll call use state. Go ahead and just wrap what we currently have and remove that right there. And we're going to put that into an array because that's how we set our state. So we have the value itself and then set position for the updater method or setter method. And from here, what we need to do is we're first going to start with our mouse position. So we want to know where the mouse is when we first click on the card itself. Now, we don't know what that's going to be right away. So we're going to set our mouse start position X and Y at 0 right here. So we'll just go ahead and bring this down here. And we're also going to need a reference to our card itself. So we have some setup to do before we start creating those mouse move and mouse down events here. Our card ref is going to reference the card itself. So let's bring that in here just above our card class. And we'll set the ref here. And from here, we can create our functions to respond to certain mouse events. So the first one we're going to listen for is going to be the mouse down event. And we're going to pass in the event itself here. And on mouse down, what we're going to do is go ahead and set this start position right here. And the position is going to be the current mouse position. So we'll set the X position to e.clientX, and we'll do the same for the Y position. So mouse start POS is going to be, or mouse start POS Y is going to be e.clientY. So we set that initial position, and we're going to use these values to calculate the distance from the current position to the next one. So we have to set it on mouse down. And from here, we're going to call document.addEventListener, and we're going to listen for the mouse move event. Now on mouse move, we're going to trigger the mouse move function, which we don't have yet. So we're going to create that. So we kick things off here. We add that to the DOM. Let's create the mouse move function. And this is really where all the magic happens here. And I'm going to have to do a little bit of explaining here just to make sure you understand how it works. So on mouse move, first thing we're going to do is create a object here called mouse move dir for mouse move direction. And this is going to be an object that holds the X and Y position. So X is going to be calculated by taking the current mouse X position and subtracting it from the new position. So e.clientX like that. So from the time we clicked on it to where when we moved it, that position had changed. And we want to know this is going to be a couple of pixels to the top, bottom, right, left, wherever that goes. We're going to figure out how far that moved. And we're going to take that value and we're going to be able to calculate the new position based on that. So we'll take the X position and we'll do the same for Y. And we'll do e.clientY. And I'll show you the output here in a second. So we're going to take these values. Then once we figure out the mouse move direction, we're going to reset the mouse starting positions for the next move, because we can call this mouse move function maybe 100 times in a second or a couple seconds, because we're going to drag it across the screen and it's going to recalculate every single second that it moves or every single time. So we want to set the mouse start position. So on the next move, we can run that calculation again. And I just realized we need to set Y right there. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually start this off here. And it's not going to work too well because we're not actually going to update the card, but let's go ahead and console out the mouse direction here. So console.log, we'll take this mouse move direction, and I just want to show you what this looks like. So let's throw that out here, and we want to trigger mouse down anytime we click on the card header. So let's go ahead and add that here. So on mouse down, we'll call the mouse down function, and let's just take a look here. So we have our console open, and as I click on it, now I'm just moving this around, and you notice how the X and Y position keep changing. Let's zoom in a little bit and see this here. So as I'm moving, the card's not moving, but it's tracking my mouse here. So if I move to the right, we see a bunch of -1s there. And then if I move up, we keep seeing those pixel values change. So that's what we're doing here. Now, once we've done that, we can actually move the card here. So let's go back into our note card, and we want to actually set the position itself. So once we've recalculated everything, we've calibrated it all, let's go ahead and clear that up. We can call set position, and this will update the actual card because we're going to update the state here. Now, within the set position function, we're going to set the X position, and we're going to calculate this by calling cardRef.current, and we're going to use the offset top and left position. So current.offset top or offset left to start, and that's going to be minus mouse move direction .x, and we're going to do the same for Y. So offset left tells us the distance from our current card to the left side of our screen, and then Y does the distance from the top to the current card here. So mouse move Y, and then this is going to be top right here. So let's take that, update it. I'm just making sure it's all right. So cardRef.current offset left for X, and then offset top for Y. Okay. So that should do it. Let's see if we have any errors. So now when I drag it, look at that. I can move it around. The only issue is I let go and I can still move it. It doesn't let go of the actual card itself. I can click on the next card, or maybe it won't. I guess the only way for me to do that is by refreshing the screen. Now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and remove the event listener on mouse up. So when we let go, we want to make sure we can actually release this card, remove those event listeners, and then click on another card. So let's go into our notes here, and we'll move down here. So we added mouse down. Now on mouse up, all we're going to do is go ahead and remove the mouse move and mouse up event listener. So really what I need to do is I need to actually add the mouse up event here. So let's start by creating this entire function. We'll bring this in here. So after mouse move, we'll bring this right here, but mouse up is not technically added to the DOM yet. So we'll just go ahead and bring this right here. So on mouse down, we're going to add the mouse up event function. And this is going to be mouse up, and we'll call mouse up like that. So once I save that, we should go ahead and remove those. And if I test this out, let's go ahead and refresh it. And now I should be able to grab any card and move it around, let go, grab another one, and we successfully have added and removed those events as we're clicking on those cards. And that gives us that perfect effect of being able to grab and drag and drop any card. Now, there is something that's happening here that I want to fix. There's actually a few things, but one of those is the fact that I can take this card and I can move it way off of screen, and then now from here, I can't grab it. Now, if it goes to the bottom left and right, technically I can set some bounds here too, but that's fine because I can scroll. So anytime it goes this way, I can scroll, but I shouldn't be able to go all the way to the top. Now, in order to get this, I have to refresh, but if that's saved, I can't get that item anymore. So I want to create those borders. So let's go ahead and go into our guide here, and let's go into section 2.2 inside of setting bounds. And what we'll do here is we're going to create a new function here, and we're going to put this into its own file. And this function is going to allow us to calculate the actual distance from the top and left. And if that value goes below -1, then we go ahead and set that to 0. So it's going to go ahead and reset it, and it doesn't let us drag it any further. And we've just done this right now. So we're basically abstracting this code and we're putting it into that function. Then we're going to take this new offset function, or set new offset, and we're going to use this function right here to create that new position, and then we'll call that with the set position method. So let's go ahead and create the function, and this is going to be inside of utils.js. I want to make sure to start separating a little bit of code here. So all utility functions will be brought in here, and this is going to be set new offset. And with this function, we want to pass in the card ref itself and then the mouse move direction. So the direction we actually moved, and card ref will be passed in as card as a parameter here. So we'll bring that in, and then mouse move dir. And if we don't have any values, we're going to set x to 0 and then y to 0. So we just want to make sure we at least have some default values. So that's only if we don't pass anything in. Now, within the function itself, let's go ahead and set the variable of offset left, and this will be equal to card.offsetLeft minus the mouse move direction. So we first want to figure out where we're going to reposition it, and if these values are less than 0, then we update. So mouse move direction, x, we want to update that, and then const offset top, and that's going to be card.offset top like that, minus mouse move direction dot y. Okay, so let's go ahead and return the following. So we'll return an object here, and x will be equal to offset left. And if we're less than 0, then we want to go ahead and update this. So we're going to throw in a question mark here. If it's less than 0, we set it to 0. So if it's -1, then we update that. We don't let it go any further. And if it's not, then we just pass in the original offset left value. Let's grab this for x, and we'll do the same for top. This will be top right here. And we'll fix this, change that to top. And that should be done once I update this, just making sure. Offset top, y, okay, perfect. So we can take this function and bring this into notecard. So we'll import set offset from utils, and we're just going to make the update by setting new position on mouse move. So we'll create a variable called new position, and this will be using set new offset, and we're going to pass in card ref dot current. So that's how we get that offset top and left position, and then mouse move direction, which we get from here. So we set those values, and then we can update set position to new position because new position is returning this object. So let's go ahead and give this a test. So if we try this out, let's refresh it. Now when I move it, I can't move any further to the left, and I can't move any further to the top because once we go negative, it stops us, but we can move right. So perfect, that's exactly what we needed. So next step here, let's go ahead and actually clean up our code a little bit. So this auto grow function, let's just bring this into our utils.js function or file and make things a little bit cleaner. So we'll take auto grow, let's remove that, and we'll bring that in here. Let's add in export, save that, and we'll import it, auto grow, and we should have the same functionality. Hopefully we don't have any errors. Let's see, it looks like we have a bug here. What's the issue? So text area ref is not defined. Text area ref, okay, that's what happened. So I need to update this because we need to pass down that parameter and I didn't pass it down correctly. So now when I refresh it, auto grow should work. Perfect, our code is a little bit cleaner. And now we can move to active card Z index. So what's happening here is right now, anytime I click on a card, it looks fine. But what happens if I click on the card behind it? Well, right now, this card just happens to be on top. But if I click on the card behind it, I want the currently active card to be brought to front. So I don't want this to be random. I want to make sure that we always have an active state and we can see the card. That should happen on mouse down anytime I start typing. So we need to update this right here to make sure that we actually have an active state. So going back into our notes, what we're going to do is create a z-index function here. And we're going to take the currently active card and we're going to set the z-index to 99. So a very high number. That way it's at the very top. But the problem is we could have other cards that have a z-index of 99 if we clicked on them before. So we're going to take all the cards. We're going to get the cards by the card class and we're going to loop through them. So on click of a card, we're going to take all the other cards and set the z-index to -1 based on the current card. And we're only going to do this if those are not the active card. So let's go ahead and just copy this. I want to get this one done pretty quick here. And I just want to make sure to explain it too. So let's see, inside of utils, we'll paste this in. So first we're exporting this so we can use it. This is in utils.js. Set z-index is the function name. we pass in selected card. The current card gets the Z index of 99. Now we use document.getElements by class name. We get the card value, we loop through them, and we need to make sure that we're using array from because this is an HTML collection. If we want to iterate through this, we need to make sure that we're creating an array out of this. And then we're checking if the card, so on each iteration, if the current card on the iteration is not the selected card, go ahead and update the card style.zIndex value to the selected card.style zIndex value -1. So that means every other card will have a Z index of 998, and then this one, the active card, will be 999. So let's import that here. We'll bring that into set Z index right here from utils in note card JSX, and this is going to be on mouse down here. So as we click on it, let's call set Z index, and we'll pass in card ref.current. And I just want to make sure that's right based on the notes here. So we pass in card ref current on mouse down. And then I also want to do this on focus. So anytime we actually click to focus on that, so I'll show you what I mean by that. So if I click on this, that brings it to the top, and that brings it to the top too. But this right here is focus state on that pink card right there. So I want to make sure that that also brings it to the top. So we're going to go ahead and call that and pass in the current card. So on the text area, let's set this to on focus. And we're going to go ahead and put this inside of a function. And we'll do set Z index. And we can pass in card ref dot current. And that should do it on focus as well. So if I click on that, there we go. Start typing, and the latest or the active card is always set to the top. So that completes most of our functionality for the cards. Now it's time to officially build out a backend. All right, now it's time to really make this project a full stack application. And for our backend, we are going to be using Appwrite, as I mentioned in the intro. So if you haven't created an account with Appwrite, do that at appwrite.io, and it's free to do so. So go ahead and register, and we're going to start walking through those steps and setting up our database. So you're just going to need to go ahead and register, create an organization. And once you have that organization, you are going to be prompted to see this screen right here where you can create your first project. So let's go ahead and do that. Once you're here, click on create project, and I'm going to call this sticky notes. You can name this whatever you want. And by default, we're going to be given a project ID. So it's going to be auto-generated for us. Go ahead and create that. Okay, so here's our project dashboard, and for now, all we're gonna do is focus on the database, adding some data, and then connecting to that from the web SDK. So let's go ahead and create our database, and I'm gonna create a database called dev, as in development. You can name this whatever you want, and for the database ID, I'm just gonna leave that blank and let Appwrite generate that for me. Now, inside of a database, we have our tables. You can call them collections. We're changing this name up a little bit, but Appwrite technically has a relational database, so you can call this a table. I prefer to do that, but I'm sure I'll reference it in different ways. So we're going to create this collection or table, and I'm going to call this notes here. And same thing, we're going to create the collection ID. Appwrite's going to generate one for me. And once we have our collection, we need to set some attributes for this collection. So what's a note going to look like? We need to define that database schema. So for a note, what I'm going to do is make sure that we have a note body, and that's going to be a string here. So even though we're going to have some rich text in here, we're going to make that a string, and then we're going to stringify data and hold it in there. I'm sure you saw that in the JSON object where we had that dynamic data. We stringified it. It's still technically text, and I'm going to set the max value to, let's say, I don't know, 1,000 maybe, whatever works there. Go ahead and create that for yourself. And with that, we also want some colors, and that's also going to be a string because we're going to store this as an object. But for our colors, we're just going to stringify that data. Let's go ahead and just add in 200. I think that's enough space for us, and we'll hit create. Hopefully we don't run into limits there, and we're going to go ahead and set our position. And this will also be a string because all of that's stringified. So the size for this, let's just go 200. So we're going to have an object inside of position and inside of colors. And we're going to reference that schema soon. So once we have that, what we need to do is go ahead and add some documents. And what I did here is inside of our guide here, inside of part 3 in the Appwrite backend section, I'm going to update this by the time the video is released, but I did add in some dummy data that you can use here. So what I'm going to do here is create our first note. We have note number 1, and I'll just zoom in a little bit. And inside of note number 1, we're going to set this for our colors. So let's just copy this and hit create document for our colors. Let's just throw that in right there. So we'll save it, create, and we're going to grab the position right here. Let's take that. And I just realized I probably should add that in multiple areas before I save it. So we're going to add that, and we'll just say first note, some kind of body text. Let's go ahead and add it, and then we'll just quickly do the same for the other 2 notes. So in my case, I'm just going to do 2, but I have 3 examples here. So we'll bring that in. We'll add in another note, create document, and we'll say hello, and that's going to be our colors. And our position here, we're going to set X and Y, bring that in, and let's save that. And there we go. So we have some notes. Now, before we can actually connect to our Appwrite backend here, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we set our permissions. So within our collection, if we try to make a request, by default, that request is going to be blocked. And why that's going to happen is because Appwrite is going to be secure by default. It's not just going to allow anybody to make that request. So what we're going to say is we can set a position for certain users, different types of users. We're going to select any here, and we're going to say anybody can create, read, update, and delete. So make these types of requests to this database. Now, in theory, that's not very secure, but because of this tutorial, I want you to be able to work with this right now. Let's go ahead and just set it this way. Now, once permissions are set, let's go ahead and actually connect to our web SDK. And there's one other thing that we need to do. So we need to go into the overview tab, and we need to set allowed host to our application. So this is basically CORS configuration. Now, whenever someone tries to make a request, Appwrite, if it doesn't recognize what URL that's coming from, so in our case, it's going to be localhost, it's going to block that request because we don't want just random people spamming our SDK and trying to make requests to it. So we're going to hit add a platform, and this is going to be web, and we'll just say my app. That's where we're making these requests from. And we're going to say local host, and we don't need to specify a port number. So we'll hit next. And from here, it's showing us how to install the Appwrite web SDK. So let's just copy that, and let's actually bring that in, and let's run npm install Appwrite. So we can turn off our server, hit paste, npm install Appwrite. So we're doing this simultaneously. So we just install the Appwrite web SDK, and we're just going to click next. I'm going to skip this part, and this is going to get set up in a second. So we'll just go through this. And now we've officially allowed a host here. So we've allowed a host, we've set our permissions, we've created a database, a table, added data, and we can start connecting to this. So we'll go back into our guide, and let's just see what the next step is here. So inside of basic config here, first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and just copy all of this. We'll just grab this, and we need to set some of our Appwrite core settings here. So we need to know our project ID, our database ID, our collection ID, and make sure that we can use these to connect to it. So I'm going to create a .env file in the root directory. So .env, and we'll paste this in. So for the endpoint, that's just going to be cloud.appwrite.io/v1. For the project ID, we're going to get this from our overview tab, and that's this project ID. Make sure you're getting your own. I'm going to delete mine by the time this video comes out, so don't try to make requests to mine. For the database ID, we're just going to grab this one right here. Let's bring this in. And for the collection ID, we're just going to grab this one from notes. So we have our IDs. Let's just run our server. So npm run dev. And before we continue there, let's go to the next step here. And this is where we want to connect to our SDK. So what I'm going to do is create a folder named Appwrite, and all Appwrite configuration is going to go into this folder. So to create that configuration, let's go into our source folder, and we're going to create a new file and folder. So this will be Appwrite and then /config.js. And this is where the core Appwrite configuration will sit. So we're going to first import the client instance. This is how we can initialize an Appwrite client. Then to make any requests to the databases, we're going to import databases. And we're just going to call const client, initialize the actual client instance. And this will be new. And we're going to call the client class. Now here, in order to actually set that up, we want to set up the endpoint. So where are we going to make requests to? And that's going to be this right here. So the Vite endpoint, that's going to cloud.appwrite.io /v1. And we can import that by going to import.manage meta.env, and then pasting in the environment variable. So with the endpoint, we also need to specify the project ID. So what's the project that we're going to connect to? And that'll be the same thing. We'll grab that, bring that in, and then we're going to copy vite project ID. And that should set that up. Okay, so with that, we also need to create an instance of our database. So we'll do const databases. And remember, we can have multiple databases. So that's why we're going to set the variable up this way. So databases, and we're going to call new, call the databases class, and pass in the client instance. Okay, so once we have that, we'll export it. And we want to export the client. So we want to access this anywhere, and then the databases class right there, the instance. So now we're officially connected to our Appwrite web SDK, and it's time to make some requests to our backend and get that data that we set up here in the previous step. So what I'm going to do here is go into my notes page, and we want to stop working with this fake data. So we're going to comment that out. And because we're about to make this request, we need to set some state. So we're going to import useState and useEffect here. And inside of my notes page, we're now going to work with some real state. So we're going to set notes here, and then the setter method, which is going to be set notes. And this is going to use useState, which will be an empty array when we first start this. So if we go to my page here, we see that we have no notes. So we need to populate this. We're going to make the request from this init function, which is going to be an async function. And within this function, we need to import the databases class from our Appwrite config file, because this is how we make that first request. So we're going to do this just underneath our fake data, our fake notes here, that import. We're going to do this just below it, and we're going to import databases, and that's going to be from Appwrite config. So we import that instance, and we want to make that request, which will bring back a response, and we'll use await. And to make a request to the Appwrite backend to get a list of data from a collection or a table, we're going to call databases.listDocuments. And there's a few parameters here that we need to set. So first of all, we need to set the database that we're making a request to. So we're going to import, and we're just going to actually copy this right here. We need the database ID. So that's the first parameter, and we're going to do vite database underscore ID. And after that, we need our collection ID. So which collection are we going to make this request to? And that's going to be vite. And let's just actually copy this from our env file. So vite collection notes ID. And that's going to make that request. And let's just console this out. So we'll console.log, and let's see what that looks like. So response is going to give us the total along with an array of objects if everything works successfully. But before we do that, we need to call useEffect here. We need to actually call the function, throw in an empty dependency array so we don't call this more than once, and let's trigger init, and let's see what we get. So we're logging out the response. Let's go ahead and inspect element, go to console here, refresh it, and here we go. So we see a total, so 2 documents. Those are the 2 items that we added to our database here, and then we see these 2 objects right here where we have our first note and we say hello. So what we need to do with this is go ahead and just take this response right now. So we're going to call set notes, and set notes is going to be response.documents. So that should populate it. So let's go ahead and see what we get in the front end. And at this point, we should actually run into an error, and I want to explain what's going on here. So at this point, this is telling us that we can't parse the data inside of our note body here. So essentially what's happening is we have a string inside of our body text here. So if we go to the note component, we're taking this body right here, and we're parsing it, expecting that to be JSON data, because if this is going to be rich text, we stringify it, enter it into our database, and then when we parse it out, then it goes back to standard text here. Well, in our database, we added just standard text. It's not technically JSON data. If I wanted to make this JSON data, what I could do is go ahead and change this and add some quotes to that, and that'll make it standard JSON data because it's stringifying it, but we don't always know if this is going to be the case here, because if someone adds data manually here, then it changes up our entire backend. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a function here that doesn't just parse the data. We're going to create a function called body parser, and we're simply going to check if this is JSON data. If it is, we parse it. If it's not, then we just return back that standard text, and that should return back this array of data without any errors here. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to do that in utils.js here. So let's go ahead and create that function, and we'll export that, call it body parser. And this function is going to take in a value, and that's going to be the actual body from the note here. We'll make that an arrow function, and we're going to create a try catch here. So we'll do try and then catch. And in this case right here, let's go ahead and finish up the catch. In the try method right here, what we'll need here is just to try to parse that data. So we'll do json.parse, and we're going to take in the value, which is going to be that body. If this works, we're just going to go ahead and return this. We'll do return like that, and the function will return the parse data. If not, then we're just going to go ahead and return the value itself. So we'll just do return, if I can spell that, and that'll be the value. Now we can take this function, bring this into our note card. Let's import that from utils, and we're going to change this right here. So let's copy body parser. Let's take this, import it, and change json.parse to body parser. So we're either returning back the string or the parsed JSON string here. So once we have that, there we go. Now we can see the data. So even though this is a string, it renders it out just fine. So that's exactly what we needed. And this is data from our backend. So right now, if we just go ahead and add in something like hello world, so we'll change this, and let's make this JSON data right here. So we'll add quotes around it, so that way it can actually be parsed. And let's make sure that the other alternative works here too. So if I refresh this, now we see hello world. Now, there's a few things here that I want to fix up here. So I mentioned this inside of the documentation. And one of the things I want to take a look at is going to be the notes page here. Appwrite has a web SDK, and there's standard methods that we get to work with. So if we want to render data out, we have list documents. If we want to get data, like a single object, we have a get document function, create, update, and delete. And one of the things with these is they have built-in or default parameters that we need to use, like passing in the database ID and the note ID. Well, I want to simplify this a little bit, and I want to make this a little bit more human readable, because ideally, I would do something like this. I'll do response, await, and then just call db.notes and just call list, because I want to change that to db. I don't want to have to remember the database collection ID every single time, or both IDs. I don't want to have to import this every time. It's a little bit messy. So I would prefer creating some kind of wrappers around this and making this process a lot easier. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and just comment this out right now. And we're going to replicate this call right here. And I already added this inside of my documentation. So inside of basic config here, what I'm doing here is I'm going to go ahead and create this array of collections. So let's copy this right here in database config. And inside of my config file, I just want to add this right here, which presets my collection information. So I want a human readable name. So I want this to be notes. And if you have more collections, you would add that name here. And then I want to pass in the ID for the collection itself, and then the database ID, so I don't have to specify this every single time. Now, we have this array of collections, and I'm going to go ahead and export this. And with this step, I'm going to summarize it briefly, but I highly recommend you just copy this and we move on from here. I have a full video that explains this, so I'll link that up. But in this case, what we need to do is we need to create a databases.js file, and we're going to go ahead and just copy all of this into that file, and I'll summarize it quickly. So inside of the Appwrite folder, we'll create a databases.js file, and we'll paste this in. And in this file, what we do is we import the databases instance right here. Then we also import the collections right here that we set up, so that information for the collections itself. And then we create a DB object here. So with that object, we loop through all the collections in our array, which we only have one, and we just go ahead and wrap each Appwrite method. So create document, update document. We're still calling these methods under the hood, but we're going to change the name and how this is passed along. So if I minimize this, we now are going to have these methods for or from the DB instance. So we pass in the collection name. So we can now call db.notes, because that's going to be the collection name here. And then we're going to call create and pass along the same information, which in this case, create is simply going to pass in the collection ID, the database ID, or other way around, and then we get to proceed on with the original method. So if we do things this way, create the databases.js file, go ahead and copy and paste this in, save it, make sure you have this array right here with this information, save that, make sure you export collections, and inside of your notes page, you can now call db.notes.list. So let's actually go ahead and just save this and make sure that this works. And we also need to import db from Appwrite/databases. So it's just a wrapper around our methods, and I want to use this way of doing things from now on, so it's going to really simplify things. So if I want to make sure that that's working, let's refresh it. I shouldn't have any errors in the console, and that really should simplify our process, and it looks like it works exactly as it's supposed to. All right, so now it's time for the fun stuff. We're going to make some updates to our database anytime we move a note around by saving its X and Y positions. And also we're going to work on saving the actual note's content here. So when I refresh it, none of this information saved. So that's what we're going to work on. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to work on saving the position. So when we drag an item here on mouse up, that's when we're going to trigger an update to the database. It's going to take those X and Y values and save them. So inside of section or part number 4, in saving changes, this is where we have this in our documentation or in our written guide. We're going to start with this part right here, and then we'll move back to this save data function. So this is going to be just to abstract everything away, so that way we can reuse this function. But right now, in the mouse up event, we want to go ahead and get those positions and send the update. So inside of my note card component, let's import actually I need to make sure it's not capitalized. We're going to import db, and that's going to be from Appwrite/databases, and we want to make that call right here. So on mouse up, the first thing I need to do is go ahead and get the new position, which we're going to use the set new offset function for and pass in the card itself. So cardref.current, and if we look at this function, right here, we pass in the card, then we get the offset left and offset top position. We check if it's out of bounds. If it's not, then we just save the actual X and Y position. If not, it's not an issue, and we don't need to put in the mouse direction because this is on mouse up. We're no longer moving the mouse, so it has no new direction. So it returns back this right here, basically, so X and Y with those positions, and once we have that, we can call db.notes.update. And in this update function, first of all, we need to know what note we're going to update. So we're going to pass in the note ID, and then we're going to pass in a payload. And in that payload, we want to know what attribute we're going to update. So this will be our position. And this position right here is going to be the new position, but we need to stringify that. So JSON.stringify, and we're going to pass in new position like that. So on mouse up, we're going to get those new positions from the card itself. So top and left. Pass in position. Let's make that a string. I guess it doesn't matter. And that should make the update with a new value. So let's try that out. So we'll go into our front end. Let's move these two to the left here. If I refresh that, awesome, it saves it. Then if I move those here, refresh that, and the new position is updated. So that's exactly what we wanted. Now, from here, we want to go ahead and move everything into this save data function because we also want to call save data anytime we make an update to the text itself. So let's go ahead and create this function. So we're going to add this just below our mouse up function. So we're going to call this save data. And in here, we're going to pass in the key, so the attribute we want to update, and the value, which is going to be the payload. So the request we're actually going to make. So we'll get this payload. We want to make sure that this is stringified here. So this is going to be an object, and we want the key, and then the value is going to be JSON.stringify, and we're passing in value here. Now with this, because of the way we're setting it, we need to add in square brackets around that, because if we don't, this key right here is going to be the string of keys. So we want to explicitly make sure that it's going to be the dynamic value. So if this is position or if this is body, we want to make sure that's added. So make sure you don't forget these square brackets. So that's payload. And once we have the payload, we want to create a try catch statement here. So we'll do try catch, take that error, and we'll just do console.error for the error, and we want to send that message back. Now in the try statement, we're going to call await. We'll make this an async function, and we're going to call db.notes.update. And this is where we just pass in the note ID. So we can actually just grab, well, I'll just write it out. So note.id, and then here we can pass in the payload. Like that. So the payload is now going to be this object, so we know what key to update. And once we have this, we can take save data. We'll go ahead and bring this in right here. And the key is going to be position. So we can take that, add this as a string value, and then we'll pass in new position as the value of payload, or the value that's going to be the payload. And we can just get rid of this. So that just makes it a little bit cleaner. That way we're going to call this, and we can actually call this in the next step, and it's going to be easier. So let's just make sure that this is working. We'll go back here. We'll refresh everything. Let's see if I move it. We shouldn't have any errors. I'm going to check the console. And if I refresh it, these should stay here. And that looks good. Awesome. So we have successfully added some update functionality. So in the next section, what we're going to do is work on updates anytime we make changes to the actual text. Now, the way this is going to work, as I showed this in the preview, is when a user starts typing, we don't want to save on every single key up, because if I'm making an update request right here, that's going to be a lot of requests being sent to the backend. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in a load spinner that pops up here, and we're going to set a timer. So only once the user has stopped typing for 2 seconds, then we make that request. So if I keep typing, we're essentially just going to keep extending another 2 seconds on every single key up. Once we're done, then we have that load indicator. And then once that goes away, that means the request finished up. So this is what we're going to do in this next section. So let's just copy this saving state right here, and let's bring this into the top of our note card component here. And I also want to get this key up timer right here, which uses a ref. And I'll explain what this does in a second, but long story short, this right here is going to hold the timer ID for the set timeout function. So when we call set timeout, it returns a timer ID, and we're going to need to be able to clear that anytime we want to create a new timeout. So whenever we want to extend those 2 seconds, we need to clear the old one and set a new key up timer. So we have that right there, and down here, just under save data, let's create a function called const handle key up, and let's go ahead and just finish up the function. And we want to attach this to the text area. So we'll just add this right here, and we'll just do on key up, or not key down, but on key up. So when we're actually inputting the value, we're going to call handle key up. So with this function, I'm going to reference my notes here. So the first thing I want to do is call set saving. So as we call it, saving is now going to be true because we're in that saving state. And then we want to go ahead and get our key up timer dot current, and we want to set the value to set timeout like this. So let's go back to our notes here. So in set timeout, we're going to add a function in here, and we're going to time it out after 2000 milliseconds, so 2 seconds. And we're going to call save data. We're going to pass in body as the attribute that we want to update, and we want to pass in the text area value here. So the body data, we want to pass that in. So let's bring this into the set timeout function. So it's a function within it, and then the time, we're calling save data and then passing this in. So before we actually call this, if we keep triggering key up, it's going to keep setting our timeout, and we're going to call this a bunch of times, and we don't want to do that. So we need to add a condition here, and I'm just going to take this directly from here, paste it in, and then I'll explain it. So on set saving, we first want to check, do we currently have a timer ID in there? If we do, we clear that because we want to ignore it so this doesn't get called multiple times. So if we have it, we clear it, then we re-update it. So that check happens in the beginning. Now what we want to do is go ahead and take set saving. Once we actually call save data, at the end of this, we're going to set this back to false. And that's going to go ahead and remove our indicator once we actually add that in. So we have that here. We already added our event listener, and we want to render a saving indicator. So let's just copy this directly here, and we're going to bring this into our header. So inside of note card, we have our main div, then we have our card header. So just after our trash icon here, we're going to paste this in, and we're going to check this condition. So we're first going to check if we're currently saving. Let's go ahead and just wrap this. So if we're currently in saving state, let's go ahead and render out this div with the class name of card saving. And then we're just going to go ahead and render out the saving text here. So now I want to test this. So we'll go to our front end. And as I type here, check this out. So I'm typing, saving keeps being rendered out here. If I go ahead and remove this, it's still rendering out. So the timer is working because it keeps adding it 2 seconds after it's updated. So if I hit G, updates 1, 2, then it's out. I can do the same here, and this can render out for both right here. And now if I refresh this, look at that. It's saved in my database. So if I go back to my database, we'll go to this one right here. we're going to go into data, and now we have all that text stringified, and that's successfully updating my backend. So I want to make this look a little bit better. So I want to create like a loading indicator so it looks active. So we'll go back into our notes here, and we're going to copy this entire load spinner component. So we're going to copy spinner. Let's go ahead and bring that into icons here. We're going to create a new component called spinner, and I need to make sure it's not capitalized. So spinner.jsx. And we'll paste all of this in and make sure it's exported. So this right here is just going to be an SVG. We're rendering this out here inside of our note card. So I want to import that first. So we'll import spinner from our icons here. So icons, and that's going to be the spinner component. Let's just copy this right here, bring this into our header. So just after card saving, the opening tag, let's throw that in, and we want to set the color, and the color here is going to be colors.color text. We'll throw that in, close it off here, and let's just see what we get for now. So if I refresh that, so as I type, we see the spinner, but it's not actually spinning, and the alignment's a little bit off here. So we're going to add some CSS to actually fix this. So for this, the CSS is all provided right here. So after our spinner section, so in input changes, let's go ahead and first of all, add this to root inside of index.css. So we'll bring this in here. So that's going to be the spinning speed here, the animation. Then we're going to take this right here from keyframes all the way down to spinner and then card saving here. So that's going to be brought in just after our app or app ID. We'll save that, and that should make it look good here. So now when I type, there we go. That's the effect that I wanted. So that looks good. And now we actually update our text. We have our load spinner, and let's just see what the next section is. Here we can go into deleting notes here. So now we're going to take care of our trash icon. So we're going to create a button for that icon here. We're going to wrap it, and then the delete functionality is all going to be handled in the delete button component. So let's just dive right in and start building this out. So we'll go into our components here, and we're going to create a new component called delete button here .jsx, and we'll create the component. So React arrow function component export. That's my shortcut here. And we need to pass in a few values, and we're also going to import the trash icon here because we're just going to wrap this here. So we'll just go ahead and bring this around. We'll just do trash like that, close it off. And then for the props that we want to pass down, we want to get the note ID. So we want to know what note are we deleting. And then we actually want to update the state here to filter out the note from our front end. So we're going to do note ID and then set notes. That's going to be passed down as a prop. And as far as the function itself goes, we're going to create a handle delete function. And before we actually add in the delete functionality, I want to filter this out from the front end so we can see how this works before we actually start removing that from the database. So let's create the function here, handle delete, and we'll make this an async function. And with this, let's just go ahead and pass in on click. So we're going to do this on the div here. So on click, we're going to trigger this, and that's going to be handle delete. And then in the function itself, what I'm going to do is just copy set notes here, and we're going to bring this in to the function. And essentially, we're just calling set notes, and we're going to filter out the note by ID. So we're going to check the note ID, and we're going to say on iteration, if the current note is the note ID, go ahead and remove it, and then return back the new array. So we want to call this. Let's bring this into our note card, and we can actually remove the trash icon here. So we'll just do delete button, and this can now replace the trash icon. So down here inside of our header, we have trash. So we want to pass down set notes, and we want to pass down the note ID. And then set notes right here, we haven't used this yet, I believe, in this component. So we need to actually pass this down through the note card. So we'll do set notes like that. And then this also needs to be passed down from the parent. So let's throw this in because we update this all the way from the parent component. So we're going to do a little prop drilling. Don't worry, we're going to clean this up later using the context API, but that's in a later section. So let's go ahead and throw down set notes. So we pass it down to the component. Then within the note card itself, we take it from here. Then we pass it down to the delete button right here, and we want to make sure it's actually passed through. And now when I click the delete button, again, it's not updating the database, but we should experience how this removes the actual card. So just checking this. Okay, that looks good so far. Let's go ahead and refresh it. Let's click delete, and that removes it. And we still see our notes once we refresh it. So that's good. So I want to talk about a little issue that occurs here though. So right now we have a mouse down event that gets triggered that eventually triggers a mouse up event that actually updates our component. Well, what's happening here is whenever we click on this delete icon here, it's not only triggering the click event, it's also bubbling out and it's triggering the mouse down event, which is trying to update a note that doesn't actually exist. So right now we don't have an error because we're not deleting the icon yet, but I want to explain what this actually looks like. And I write about it here. So ultimately, anytime I did a full explanation, anytime we want to trigger it, we trigger the wrong events here. So I want to ignore those events. So let's just start with this. Let's just say console.log and we'll just say delete clicked. And we're also going to bring this into our note card and we're going to say on mouse down. First, we actually want to do this on mouse up. So we're going to say console mouse up and then we'll just say saving. And we also want to say mouse up was triggered or mouse down here. So we'll just do console.log. And it's kind of a funny issue, but it's a really important one because it's going to give us a lot of errors. So we'll say mouse down was triggered. So let me explain this. So right now, if I refresh this and if I click on mouse down, once I release, mouse up is triggering. So it's saving, right? Well, if I click on the trash icon, we first see mouse down, mouse up, and then delete was clicked. So we don't want to update a note before we delete it. So it's basically propagating those events or bubbling those out, and it's triggering the wrong events. So what I want to do here is I just want to go ahead and add this condition that basically says, hey, if the current target, so we can figure out what caused that event to fire off. So if we click on the icon, it's going to basically give us a different class name or a different target. So we want to say if the card header itself was clicked, then we just want to go ahead and ignore the rest of the mouse down events, therefore not adding the mouse up function and not calling update. So let's go ahead and just change this. So if I bring this in right here to mouse down, and we're going to say if e.target.className is the card header, go ahead and continue. Then if not, we're just going to ignore it. So I wanted to focus on this before we actually start updating the database. So right now, if I click on it, we see mouse down was triggered. That's perfect. That's what we wanted. But if we click on the trash icon, delete was clicked, and we're now successfully ignoring that event, where we're not ignoring the event itself, but we're ignoring the action that occurs after the event. So that's what we wanted. Let's go ahead and just clear out these console logs right here. We don't need that anymore. We also don't need that inside of our mouse up event. And we don't need that in our delete button. So let's remove that. And the last step in this process is to actually update the database. So now all we're going to do is call db.notes.delete, and we're going to pass in the note ID. So that's in the delete button here. We're going to import db. Then inside of handle delete, we're going to call db.notes. And in order to delete a note, all we need to do is call delete and just pass in the note ID. So let's try this. So if I go back here into my front end, let's hit delete. And now if I refresh it, that note is gone. It's no longer in my database. So now we only see one note, and that takes care of the delete functionality. Okay, so in this next section, we're going to use the context API to lift up our state and have some sort of global state, so we're not having to deal with prop drilling. And as our application gets more complex, this is going to make things easier. So if you're not familiar with the context API, you may have heard of something like Redux or React Recoil, which are basically state manager tools that allow you to lift up state and access that global state. Well, the context API is like a built-in React way of doing things, and essentially it lets us set that state, wrap our application, and having access to information is a lot easier this way. So what we want to do is we want to get rid of prop drilling here. So if you're not familiar with prop drilling, this is the process of drilling down a prop through multiple components. So we have our note page, and we need to be able to update our notes through our delete component. So in order to get that there, we have to pass down set notes into our note card. Then in our note card, we have to get that set notes method. Then we pass it down into the delete button right here. And that gets really messy. And this can really get ugly when you start doing this over and over again. So we want to fix this. So to create our context right here, we're just going to go ahead and create a new file and folder. And this is going to be in the source folder. And we're going to create a folder called context. And this context is specifically going to be for our note context. So note context.jsx, that's what we're going to call it. And this is where we're going to keep all that state. So first we want to import create context, and this is how we create it. We want to import use effect, and we're also going to have state, so use state. And now we can create our context, which we're going to export right away, and we're going to call this note context, and we can create it with the create context method. So once we have our context, we want to create a provider, which is going to provide the data and all the information down to the child component. So we're going to go ahead and create that. That's going to be note provider. And with this provider, let's go ahead and just pass in the children. I'm going to need to do a little bit of prep work, and then I'll just explain what's going on as we finish this up, because there is a little bit of preparation here. So first of all, we want to go ahead and return our provider. So that's going to come from our note context.provider. And the provider is what's actually passing down that information. Now with that, the provider itself is going to have a value, and this is going to be the data that we send down. So let's go ahead and create this data. We'll add information into it later. This is just going to be an object called context data. You can name it whatever you want. And that's going to be an empty object. And we're going to take this object and pass it down as a value. So anything that goes in here is now going to be accessible through the children. Now with our context provider or note provider, by default, we want this to be loaded up before anything else happens in our application, because if we don't have any data, we might get errors in the future. So we want to go ahead and first of all, set loading to use state, and this is going to be true. So as our application first gets loaded, the state is loading, then we'll update this. But before we actually update loading, we're going to go ahead and add a condition in here. If we're currently in loading state, let's go ahead and render out our load spinner. So first we'll bring that in. So we're just going to render this out right away. And once we're done loading, we're just going to do children like that. And let's just see how this looks right now. So if we're loading, we're just rendering out the spinner. And once we're done loading, we allow all the child components to be rendered. So let's export this before we actually use it. So we're going to export default, and this is going to be our note provider. And in order to actually use this, we're going into app.jsx. We're going to import our note provider. So everything that's wrapped inside of this provider is now going to have access to the context data. So we'll take our note provider, and we should be able to access all of this inside of the notes page now and all the child components of that. So let's just try this. Inside of our front end, here we go. We see our application. We see that load spinner. So I'll make sure that it's a little bit bigger. Let's add some styling. But we're still in that loading state. Nothing else is being rendered out. So I'll actually fix that up here. And I'm just going to copy this div right here that wraps that spinner, and we'll set the size. So we're going to cheat a little bit and just copy and paste. That's all in here. So the load spinner itself, let's paste it. I'll save it so the formatting gets fixed. And now we should see this. So let's look at our example here. So next, what we want to do is go ahead and actually create the note state. So that's coming down from here. And we're going to take this same init function and bring that into our context. So it's no longer going to be inside of our notes page. So we'll go into our pages. We'll go into notes page. Let's take this init function. We'll bring this into the notes provider. And we're also going to take use effect. So we already imported that right here. We'll bring this in here, and we'll take our notes, and we'll also paste those into our notes provider. So we have notes and loading. And at this point, let's just go ahead and get rid of all of this right here. So we don't need that. We don't need our databases anymore. Let's get rid of fake data right now. And we don't have access to any data in the notes page, but we're going to pass this down in a second. So once we have all of this, we're going to take our notes, and we're passing them through the context data. We're going to take set notes. We're going to pass those down also, so we can actually update that in the future. And inside of init, we're going to set loading to false here. So once that's set to false, we also need to get our DB instance. So let's import that from appwrite/databases, and that should complete our provider here. So we have our loading state, we get our notes, we initialize it, we load them in, loading set to false, then we pass down notes and set notes. So let's see how this works and how we can actually access this information. So from our notes page, so right now we don't have anything here, we don't have any notes. We need to get that state, and the way we can do that is by calling the use context hook right here. And use context allows us to get that object, or basically destructure the object of data here, which is going to be a note here, or we're going to take our notes from that, and we're going to call use context, and we need to specify what context we're using, which is going to be the note context. And that should just import that for me. If it doesn't, just go ahead and type that out. And now I have access to the notes inside of the note page. So I have a few issues here. So right now, set notes, I'm no longer going to prop drill that. So if I remove it and I save it in my front end, I should see some issues here. So at this point, we're going to maybe call the delete method. Right here, we get an issue because set notes is not a function. So how do we get that method down to the delete button here? So we're going to do some updating. So in our note page here, or our note component, note card, we're going to take set notes and we want to remove this. So we no longer need that. We no longer need to pass this down into the delete button here. So we're going to get rid of that right here. And in order to actually get this in the delete button, we're just going to go ahead and import use context. And let's just go ahead and actually pull that in, set notes, and we're going to use context. We're going to use note context, and I can get rid of this right here because that's going to cause an error if I don't actually pass that down. And let's just see what we have. So at this point in my console, I shouldn't have any errors, and we should be able to call that delete function right now. So we don't have any notes because we actually deleted it, but that's perfect because in the next step, we're actually going to take care of adding notes, but now we have our context provider passing down data, and we're able to take functions from that provider without prop drilling. So that's going to be a big advantage for us. Okay, so now it's time to add in some add note functionality into our application, and this is going to be in section 7.1 under add button here. So let's quickly review it, and then we're going to start building. So first of all, we have this add component, and this is going to need a new icon called plus. So we're going to add in this icon, and then we're going to create a controls component, which will actually hold not just our add button, but it'll also hold our other colors that we're going to add on in the next section. So that way we have a whole controls panel that we can work with, and this is where our add component is going to sit within. So let's actually start with this plus icon. So what I want to do here is go ahead and just copy that. We're going to add this into the icon section, and we'll call this plus.jsx. And we'll paste this in, and I want to make sure this is exported. So let's just export default. And once we have that, we want to create the add component. So that's going into components. We'll call this add button, and we'll just do React arrow function component exported. We'll go ahead and generate that. Let's just add in our plus icon in here, and we're going to render that out right away. So we'll just do plus, and we'll finish that off right there. Save that, let the indentation get fixed here, and we'll just remove that extra bracket there. So from here, once we have the plus icon in here, we're just going to add the ID of add button. We want to make sure that we can get some styling here. We'll throw that in, and let's just continue scrolling down here and see what's next. So we have our control panel now. So we're going to create that, and within our control panel, we're going to add in our add button. So we're just nesting a few buttons here, or a few components. So we'll call this component controls. We'll generate that real quick. And in here, let's just import our add button. We'll bring this in here. Just a little bit of redundant stuff here. And then we want an ID, and the name of the ID is going to be controls. So we'll throw that in, and we'll just finish this up with some styling. I believe that's the next step here. So once we have that, we're just going to add controls into our notes page, so we can't see anything just yet, and we'll just render this out. So this technically is going to have a fixed position, so it really doesn't matter where this component goes, this controls component, because we're going to place it on the left side of our screen, right in the middle when it comes to how we center that vertically, I believe. I always get that mixed up. So let's import the controls component. And I'll just put this at the bottom just so it doesn't get in the way of anything. And now if I go to my application, here we see that plus icon. So we just want to style that now. So if we scroll down, we have some CSS to add. So we have our controls ID and our add button styling here, and then our hover effect. So let's just copy all of this and we'll bring this into index.css. I'm going to add this to the bottom of the page and let's just review it. So we have our controls. We have our own styling for the controls here. We make sure that the position is fixed. This allows us to put this anywhere. And then the top and bottom position here, we just make sure that's 50%. We have some background colors, some shading. We also set Z index to 10,000 just to make sure it's brought to the front. So if we have any notes that go behind it, they're going to actually be behind the component and won't cover our controls. Now for the add button itself, we have a background color. And we just make sure everything's centered. We make sure we have a border radius of 50%, a height and width to this, and then just a hover effect. So it's going to look a little bit weird right now with just this button here. So let's see what that looks like. So here's that effect right here, and that's our add button. So now we want to actually add in some functionality. So what we need to do here is first, we need to have a default color for the button that we create. So we have this array of colors that we're going to work with, and we have 4 different options. So we have a yellow, green, blue, and purple button, and we're going to create this array, and then we're going to reference the first index of this array to set our default color, which will be yellow. If you want to change the default component or default note card when you create one, you can just go ahead and change the index here. That's up to you, but we're going to work with this one. So let's copy this. We'll bring this into assets, and this is going to be colors.json, and we can just paste this in right here. That looks good. And now we just want to import that into our add button here. So let's just remove a few things here, and we'll go into add button, and we're going to import colors from, and then we're going into assets /colors. So we bring that in, and we need a handle add function now. So if we go into our add component, we're going to create this function that basically handles adding a note. We're going to call that add note, and we're going to send a payload, and we're going to call create or send a create request to our database. So let's start by first creating the add note function. So let's create some space here. And for this add note function, we want to make sure this is an async function. And the first thing we're going to do here is create an initial state for this note. So we want to pass along the payload here with that initial data, and that's going to be an object like this. And we first want to make sure that we have the note position, and we're going to set some default values here. But before we do that, we want to make sure it's stringified, because even though we're going to pass along an object like this, we want to make sure that that's string in that database. And for this starting position, we're going to set this to 10, but we need something specific to happen here, because when we add a note, if you happen to add notes, let's say 2 notes at once, we want to make sure that those notes don't stack on top of each other, that the next note will have a different position, so we can actually see those get indented and moved along the screen as we add those. So we want to make sure that they don't overlap each other. So for this, we're going to import useRef here, and we're going to create a starting point. So starting POS, and this is going to be useRef, and then we're going to set this to 10, and then we're going to set X to starting POS.current, which is going to be 10 on the first instance of this. So we're going to set that for X, then we'll do the same for Y, and that's going to be the note's first position. Now, after we do that, we want to make sure that we have our colors. So colors is going to be JSON.stringify, and we're going to stringify the colors, and that's going to be the first index from the colors array. So we'll do yellow. You can go to any index that you want. I just want that to be my default. Once we create the payload, we want to go ahead and update the starting position. So if we happen to add another note, we want to make sure to increment this. So we'll do starting position.current, and that'll be plus equals 10. So we're just going to indent it 10 from the top, 10 from the left, and that'll move it to the side here. So we just want to make sure that we have a new one each time here. So from here, we can actually go ahead and just add this to our database. So we're going to import db from, and then we're going into Appwrite /databases, and we're just going to call db.update. So this is all within the add note function, db.notes create. And with this, we can just go ahead and pass along the payload. Our ID will be automatically generated for us. And we just want to console out the payload. And let's just see what we get here. So last thing to do here is just go ahead and take this function, and we'll just do on click, we'll call add note. Let's give this a test. So hoping everything went correctly here. No errors. Let's refresh it. And the note is not going to appear right away. We still haven't added this to our state yet, but let's just try this. So we're going to hit add note. And here we go. We get this response. Let me zoom out a little bit. This is our object with a new note. Now, if I refresh this, we're going to go ahead and see that note. And now I can actually update it. And this is in my database. If I hit this twice, we should, in theory, see the notes stack up on top of each other like that. So that's the effect that we're trying to create. Now, it looks fine here, but when we do this all at once with the state being updated, that's where we really need that to happen. So let's go into the next step here, and we're going to scroll down into updating our context state. So we're going to go ahead and get the set notes method here from our context. Let me zoom in a little bit. And we just want to make sure that we can update the state. So once we get that response, we're going to update this and fill it in. So let's do that from the top of add button. We'll import use context. Then at the top here, we're just going to go ahead and do const destructure set notes from context. And we're going to call use context. And now we can get note context should automatically import for us. So use context and then note context. Let's just quickly import that and see what's going on. So we'll do import, and that's going to be note context from, we're going into context and then note context. Okay, let's just manually do that. Usually it just auto fills that for me, but let's give this a test. So once we have that, we're going to change this right here. We'll do set notes. And let's just copy this directly here. So we're just going to take that previous state, take that response, and then use the spread operator to add the new note, I believe at the end of the array. Yeah, we're actually adding it to the beginning of the state here. So that's going to update our set note state. So let's refresh our page. Let's give this a test. I'm going to delete these two. And now when we add them, we should see that note being added and indented. So this is most of what we want. There's still an issue here. So you notice as I add new notes, the note is being added and incremented, so it's being added slowly to the bottom right. But as we add it, the new note gets placed behind all the other notes. Now, if I select a note and make that the active state, it'll be brought to front, but we want to make sure that that's the default behavior. So this is an easy fix. All we need to do is go into our note card, and we're just going to use this setZindex function, and we're going to call this on use effect. So not just on key up or when we click that card header. We're going to call cardRef.current, and this is going to be right away when the note is rendered out, and that should fix it. So now when we add it, this is going to bring the first note, and then the next one should be above it like that, and that's fixing our active state, and that's more so of what we wanted. So I really like that. I think it's looking good. All right, so we're in the final stretch here, and now it's time to allow users to actually update the colors of specific notes. So we're in section 8.1 with our guide, and what we're going to do here is create a color component, and we're going to render out these colors inside of our controls component. And the colors are going to be generated from this colors array right here inside of assets. So we're going to loop through this array, and we're going to specify a specific color for each instance of that component. So let's go ahead and just kick this off, and we're going to create the component first. So let's close this out. We're going into components. Let's create the new component called color, and let's generate the component itself. And within this, we're going to pass in the color, which will be passed in from the array. So on each iteration, we'll throw in the color as an object, and let's give this a class name of color. And within this, we're going to add in a function that can handle the click. So on click, whenever we click on this, we're going to go ahead and change the color. So we're going to call this change color. We'll create this in a second, and let's go ahead and generate that. So change color. And the first thing we want to do is just console out the color and make sure we actually clicked on the right one, and just to ensure that we're passing this information down correctly. So we'll do console.log, and let's console out the color. So on click, we console it out. We also want to make sure that each color has its own styling. So let's indent this right here, make sure that we can add in inline styling, and we'll just do style, and we're going to set the background color. We're going into color.color header. If we go into our array, this is the color that we're trying to get. So we're going into color header. So as we pass it down, we get the color of the header, and that's what it's going to look like once it actually gets rendered. So from here, we also need to make sure we just add in some CSS, because if there's no height or width, you're not going to see anything here. So let's go into this section right here. Let's copy that. So the color class and then the hover effect, and we'll bring this into index.css. So we'll bring that down, add this just below the add button, and now it's time to actually render out the colors. So this is going to be in the controls component. So we need to import the actual color data. So we'll import colors, then the actual color component. And then at this point, we just want to map through all the colors inside of our colors array here. And then we're going to render out each component. So we'll just do colors.map. And each color is going to get a key, which is going to be the color ID. And then we want to pass in the actual object here, so the data. So we pass in the color component, we render these out. So at this point, we should just see all those components inside of our controls. So let's take a look at this. So here we go. We have our colors. That looks good. And now whenever we click on this, let's make sure that the actual correct color is rendered out. So if we zoom out a little bit, let's click on green. We see color green in all the data. If we click on purple, blue, yellow, that's exactly what we want to see. So that looks good right there. Okay, so now we actually want to implement this change right here. So first, what we're going to do is, now that we've lifted up our state, anytime we select some kind of note, so let's say we start the process and focus on the note, or we click the header, we want to make sure that that is the currently active note. If that's the note, then when we click it, we want to make sure that that color is applied to that note. If we haven't selected a note, we just want to maybe create some kind of alert that says you need to select a note before you can change a color. So back inside of our guide, we're going to go ahead and go into our nodes provider. We're going to create the selected note state. By default, it's going to be null. Then we're going to pass this information down. And in the note card, we're going to add this to certain events like on focus and on mouse down on that header. So let's just do that. So going into our context, so note context, let's bring this in. We'll add this right here after loading. So we have selected note. Then we need to pass this down here inside of our context data. So we'll do selected note and set selected note. So the first step is to set the selected note. So we'll go into our note card here. So let's close all that out. Go into components. Let's go into note card, and we'll bring this in from our context data, which we have used. Maybe we haven't. I thought we did. I thought we used that here. So let's just import use context. So import use context, and we're going to use the set colors. So, or set selected note from use context, and then we'll bring in note context. That's going to import note context. And now let's see, on mouse down, this is where we want to set it. So we're just going to go ahead and add this in right here. And let's see, do we want to pass in the full note? So we're just going to go ahead and pass in the note data. So the note data that's passed in as a prop right here, we're going to take this. So that's just going to be the note object, which holds the note information like the ID and all the other data that's stored in our database. And we're passing that into selected note. So if we bring this down here, we also want to do this on focus. So let's see, we have on focus where we set the Z index. We'll also make sure that the selected note is selected there. And then once we set that here, inside of our color component, let's go ahead and actually console out the selected note. Let's make sure that this is actually working properly. So we'll import use context, and let's just get the selected note. So selected note, and we're getting that from note context. It's so weird because in this component, for some reason, it doesn't auto import, but it is correct. So we just need to manually bring that in, and we're importing that from context, and we're getting note context. Okay, so now instead of the color, let's get the selected note. So let's give this a test now. So what we're going to do is let's just say note 1, and then we'll just say hello world for these. Let's make sure they're saved. And we're going to refresh this because the note state won't update for the color change. We only need the ID of the note. So when I change this, it's not going to change the actual data for the selected note. And we don't need that, so it's totally fine. So we have note 1. And if I click on a color, here we go. We see the body data of note 1. And if I click on hello world, so let's click on the header, hit change. Now we see hello world. Now if I just click on focus for note 1, any color that I click on is going to give me the active note here, the object. So really we only need the ID, but we're going to get that actual note. So that's exactly what we wanted. Now the final step is to actually change the color. Then we need to send that data to the database. So let's go ahead and go into the next step. So handle color change in section 8.1. What we need to do is we're going to create this try catch. So first of all, I'm going to take this alert message right here, and we're going to go into change color. And I'm going to create a try catch. We just want to make sure that anytime we don't have a selected note, we could also write a if statement here, but this is fine. We're just going to say you must select a note before changing colors. Now, if we do have a selected note, then what we're going to do is go ahead and go into the notes state here. So we need to import that. And we're going to search for where this note is inside of this state. So we want to find the index. Then we want to be able to actually update the note based on where it's at and resubmit it and then send the update to the database. So first step is to find that. So we're going to go ahead and create a new variable called current note index. And for this, we're going to use the find index method. And inside of this function, first thing we're going to do is go ahead and take the note on each iteration. Then we're going to create a function here, and we're going to say if the note.id is equal to the selected note.id, so that means we found that specific note. If we have it, go ahead and return the index. So this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however long our array is and where that note was. That's going to be the value of current note index. So we find that. That's the first step here. Now, the next step is to go ahead and create an updated version of this note. So we're going to call this updated note. And this is going to be an object. So we're creating an entirely new object for this note. We're going to take that note that we found. We're going into the notes array. And we're going to use the current index of the note. So we're basically using the spread operator to create a new object, get the original note data, pass it through this object. And then specifically, we want to go ahead and update the colors here. So we're going to do colors, and that's going to be json.stringify. And we're going to stringify the new color data. So we're passing in the new colors into that note within that index. And from here, we can create a new array for our note state and actually have that updated. So I'm going to create this new array called new notes. And we're going to make a copy of the original notes here where we're using the spread operator. That's going to create an entirely new array. Now with this new array, we can actually update that. So we're going into new notes. We're going to take the current note index. So we're taking that note and we're going to update this note with the updated note. So we're passing in a new object to that note within the index. And then the last step here is to go ahead and call set notes and actually update it. So let's bring that in from our context. We'll do set notes here, and let's try testing this before we actually update our database. So we'll pass in new notes right here, and that should go ahead and completely recreate the state here. So let's go ahead and try this. Let's select a note. We'll hit blue. We'll move that one. We'll do purple. We'll focus on that one. We'll do green. And that looks like it's working properly. Now, if I refresh it, the colors are going to go back. So we just need to make sure that we update it. So we'll go here after we set the new notes. Let's go ahead and call db.notes. And let's make sure I updated or imported db. Let's bring that in. There we go. We have the import db.notes.update. And what we're going to do here is go ahead and take the selected note ID. We want to know what note to update. And we're just going to pass along the payload, which is going to be colors. And we're passing in the colors here. Let me just change this indentation. And we're just going to stringify color instance right here. So we have that, and we pass along the new data. So let's go ahead and test this. And we'll select this note. We'll change that to green. We'll focus on this one, change it to blue. We'll even move this one, go to purple, and let's refresh it. And that's all working. So we can now update notes, we can reposition them, change their colors, and that does it for our application. All right, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and you learned a bunch in this process. And if you happen to build on top of this project and you want to share your links with me, go ahead and tweet at me. My information is linked up in the video description. I would love to see what you come up with and the end results to your projects. And to the Free Code Camp team, thank you so much for having me here. I really enjoyed being on the channel. It's really an honor, and I hope to be back someday. So with that being said, see you all next time.